Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. As you can see, I am here with December's featured member, Ros Young. Ros, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, actually. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm good.
Are you having a good week?
Do you know what? I am. Even with the topsy-turviness of it all, there's a certain sense of a little bit more steadiness and perhaps a bit more confidence in knowing what can and what can't. And that's certainly been received by clients.
Yeah.
And they're still coming. So I think the confidence is held. So I'm having a good week. Thank you.
Yes. So we discussed over the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks around the whole process of closed shop recruitment, and really wanted to kind of focus on that particular topic in this In Conversation With episode, because as you know, APA, when we started over a year ago, well, it's almost 18 months ago now. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the closed shop recruitment was really crippling the therapeutic community. And we have since then spoken directly to around about 60 plus employers now, who have all, bar none, been under a misperception about the therapy world and governing body statuses, advertising roles, the protection that they have as employers and recruitment agencies to mandate professionals to be affiliated to specific voluntary registers. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you've had experience with that, and I'd like us to kind of explore that a little bit. But you've also had some experience of challenging that.
Yeah.
And I think it's brilliant when any professional kind of stands up and says, why, number one, but two, educates and supports the outside world in understanding the realities of the therapeutic process and the arena in which we work. Mm. So let's go to your experience of closed shop recruitment first off. What would you say is probably your worst example of that?
Yeah, the worst one wasn't too long ago, so it can't even sort of been put into the library of antiquity. It's pretty close. It's about 2.5-3 years ago. Mm-hmm. There was an individual who was looking to employ a colleague, and I read the specifics. And it's sort of, do you know what? That's me. That's absolutely me. Sent in, said, "Oh, this is me. I think I would very much like to apply for this. I think it just what a fabulous idea." And the answer that came back was, obviously I can't remember the words exactly, but it was very clear. The answer was, "You're absolutely perfect for this role. It's clearly what you do. You are more than qualified. You've got plenty of experience in this field, but we're not taking your application further because you're not a member of BACP." And
that's direct.
It was so direct. It was like, oh wow, really? So and I mean, I have a fairly prominent justice button. I have to admit that. But this was like, wow, this is so blatant. It wasn't even sort of hidden in the, well, we've had so many applicants, it's, we're inundated, ever so sorry, or your application didn't come in by the closing date or whatever. It was right there in writing. You are perfect for the job, but you're not a member of our preferred club. Yeah. And I suppose maybe coming from a nursing background where I fully understand the legal governing bodies, those organisations that have been set the duty by the state to make sure that trainings and behaviours are of an acceptable standard. And as a registered nurse, you cannot practice as a nurse unless you are registered by the state.
Yeah.
So I understand that. And I suppose in understanding that, my clear understanding was that BACP as a voluntary body does not have that standing whatsoever. And so it cannot be required as part of a job acceptability.
Yeah.
It just can't. So, but they were absolutely not moving. They didn't answer queries after that. They didn't even answer professional body queries after that. It was incredibly silent after they'd said, well, we're entitled to prefer. But it wasn't preference, it was mandatory, because they didn't take it any further forward and stated why. Yeah.
And that's the difference, isn't it? The mandatory nature of that perception that allows this idea of protection in order to make that mandatory statement.
Yeah.
And, APRA has never said, take membership bodies off of recruitment.
No.
It's always been be a preference.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's a voluntary register.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you mandate somebody to be on a voluntary register, it can't be a voluntary register because you're not there voluntarily.
No, you're forced. You are compelled to be there.
Yeah, democracy through at the end of a rifle isn't democracy.
No, it's coercion. And we as therapists perhaps ought to be practicing anti-coercion in all aspects of our life. And where we see or witness coercion, I would almost think of it as perhaps a duty to call it out. Because if we know that it's happening and we remain quiet or don't even point at it to go, what is that? Then at what point do we become complicit and in allowing coercion somewhere? And then the question is, well, where would we not allow coercion? And that would cause me concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's been put to APA that our standpoint on this was coercion is coercion, ultimately. And the relationship between a membership body and its members should be on the same basis as the relationship between a client and the professional themselves.
Yeah.
And if a client comes in and says, here is the situation, and the professional says, you know what, that looked like a coercive environment. It doesn't matter whether it's an abusively coercive or it's coercive, right? I'm not talking about domestic abuse relationships. I'm not talking about anything along that extreme in this instance. We're talking about an environment that's coercive. Does the professional have an ethical duty to highlight coercion?
I would say yes. Right? I would say yes, yeah.
Would it be unethical then for that professional with that environment in front of them to suggest, we'll speak to the coercive partner and their contacts and see whether or not they think it's coercive? It's not, is it?
It's not for an effective third party to take that decision from the person.
Exactly, right? So in essence, what we've allowed to happen over the last however long it's taken to get to this point, the third party are employers and recruiters. And we go into them going, is this right? Well, is it for them to be saying it's right or it's wrong? Because ultimately it's lazy recruitment. They're relying on the membership body to do all of the checks that they can't have the time or functionality to do without actually checking the ethicity of the actual body, because it cannot be ethical to coerce somebody into a membership body that's voluntary.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, being a member of a group of colleagues is absolutely perfect as a preference, because it does give an indication of the willingness of the individual to be asked questions about their work within the remit of that group of people. Say, APA, yes, if question was asked about my working practice, then my being a member of APA will enable for questions to be asked of me, and for me to be accountable to people who are in that same place and would understand the answers that would be given, and also the questions to be asked. So it shows an element of openness and transparency and a willingness to be asked to account for what we're doing, to give answer, to give reason. And that's absolutely perfect. But to, as you say, to rely on the voluntary bodies to have done the employment law checks, it really doesn't follow. It doesn't make sense, because they're a voluntary group with their own specific focuses and ideas of practice, because I mean, there are various and they have slightly different slants, but there is the basic employment law of you check references, you check qualifications, and you can find out how a person operates by talking to them in interview. So, you know, you've got it all there. You don't actually need, in employment, to have anything to do with voluntary bodies. I mean, by all means, prefer them, notice what it means about the person who's applying if they are a member, but you can't say that you have to.
It's, you know, have to, the mandate comes from protected professions that are government covered, if you like. You know, they have governing bodies that are sanctioned by government.
Absolutely.
It's quite telling, I think, that when the current employment law was pieced together, current act being the 1990 Employment Act, there was only two psychological professions that were protected: psychiatrist and clinical psychologist. And the representation for both of those came from the General Medical Council and HCPC, who look after both those positions respectively. But no representation appears to have been made for any of the other psychological-based support professions. And that, for me, is quite telling, that at a point in time where the profession could really stand up and say, here is the transparency. Here is the baseline. And this baseline cannot... that representation was either very, very quiet or didn't happen. And we now have a situation, some 30 years on, where we are struggling as a community to protect our own ethical standard, because we've actually anchored ourselves to a process where there is misrepresentation.
I mean, I think the employers have been anchored in, haven't they? They've been given this schema of protection, of high standards, all of that, and given the mistaken notion that that can only be found in one or two places, whereas in actual fact it can be found all over. I mean, a membership of a voluntary body or even a statutory body does not equate to a high standard of professional working. It just doesn't, because if it did, we wouldn't have Harold Shipman for a start, because he was a member of the GMC.
And it's a perfect example, isn't it? It's the due diligence of the employer, and you know, I think we mentioned it in the featured member conversation, that when you've got a situation where somebody is employed within a larger organization as a therapeutic professional, if anything goes wrong, they don't go to the membership body that person is affiliated to until after they've gone through their own disciplinary protocols. And it's almost a retrospective. We're letting you know this is what's happened. We've already dealt with this in-house. So the requirement that is placed on coming into that working environment is needless at the point of entry.
Yeah.
If anything,
yeah, it has. It
at
has.
the point of exit.
Yeah, it has absolutely no standing in that space of employment at all, really. Absolutely none. So,
I mean, let's be clear. What we are not saying that people should not be members of membership bodies,
oh no,
or of any particular membership body, and we're not attacking any membership body. What we're saying is that the mandating of affiliation to specific organisations prior to recruitment doesn't fit within the remit of employment law, because
No.
they are not the governing body.
Yeah.
Please, if any employers are watching, place the preference on whoever you want, but do not exclude, because it's the exclusion of qualified professionals. And that's the key. They must be qualified. Affiliation is not a qualification. And that, again, is something that we've heard from employers. They're not qualified if they're not affiliated. No, not so. Qualified means qualified.
Yeah.
Affiliated is your backup.
Yeah. And I know that some people say, well, accreditation means enough experience. But again, that doesn't really hold water, because you can gain knowledge and experience without needing to follow the accreditation process. And the accreditation process is only relevant within that voluntary membership body. And you can get experience. You can. I mean, in my case, it was ridiculous. I was looking at how many supervised working client hours I've got, and it exceeds 7,000 hours. It was ridiculous. So, and yet I wasn't going to be employed because I wasn't a member of a particular voluntary club, and I purposefully call them clubs at this present moment, because it almost feels really important to be clear with language.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of APA being a club.
but it's a group of people. It's a group of people with a common aim, a common understanding, a purpose for having that group and having that membership.
Yes. And having the ethical framework that is congruent to everything else. But what we've seen is the ethical framework is used as a reason to be unethical.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Where
is the what ethical
I'm
questions?
Pick this tree into being a stick with this stick.
Yeah, you know, to where is the ethic in saying no one else is suitable unless they've paid a particular group of people a pot of money and have signed on their membership rules? They're not state regulators. There's no law says anybody has to. So it's a misrepresentation, and I wonder about the ethics of misrepresentation in that way.
I mean, one of the things that really struck me since launching APA, and it's when we presented this to the wider world and kind of went, let's actually question this. Let's make this a point of view.
Yeah.
And let people actually focus on that for a second. The organisations were asked to publicly clarify that they were not a governing body.
Well, it seems very simple, doesn't it?
Fairly straightforward. We're not a governing body. We don't have the legal remit. We can't strike somebody off and prevent them from working. We can't this, we can't that, because we're not sanctioned by the state. And employers can choose who they want.
Yes.
Based on the best person for the job, on qualifications, experience, personality, team fit, all of the things that we know recruiters select anyway.
Yes.
We had written response that from one organisation that said, we don't see any interest in making that public. We've never told anybody that we're a governing body, and we don't see any interest in saying that publicly. Well, if you've never told anybody that, then you won't be going against yourself by publicly stating it.
Yeah.
But when you then see the same organisation in public presentation say, we are the organisation that every professional must be a member of, what's the connotation to every employer that hears that?
That they are the one and only professional membership.
And if you don't know any different, what do you then go off and work with?
Yeah. And this is why even this morning, adverts out there in the public domain, we are seeking to recruit a BACP accredited counsellor. Nobody else, no clarification before or after. Clearly, a place, many places, it's just the one advert I spotted even this morning, restricting employment to only BACP accredited people.
Yeah. And it's for us, I think it's frightening because we know the numbers. And it's in a situation where as the year comes to an end, where we've had the worst psychological trauma imposed upon the planet.
Oh yeah.
Ultimately, you know, we can say, yeah, world wars, conflicts, civil wars, yes.
Horrid.
Absolutely terrifyingly impactful on the trauma senses, right? But this is global and it's invisible and we are all affected by it. Every single person on this planet.
Yeah, and it is, for some, bringing out the level of response that I think a previous in conversation guest was saying. It's the same response in child abuse. It hits every aspect of the human psyche and physiology. It's truly devastating. And for many, it will be like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
And so for others, it will be horrifying.
Yeah. So at this moment in time, in our evolutionary tract, when the psychological world needs to be at its strongest, 2 at its most active and most effective, we've almost imploded.
Yeah.
We have these bottlenecks that were placed long ago for very good reasons and good intent, I am sure. But because they haven't been evolutionary bottlenecks, they haven't moved with what's needed, we now have a situation where our primary care supplier in the UK, that's the National Health Service, can only engage with 20% of the professionals that are affiliated to 2 membership bodies now. Used to be 1, but now it's 2. But of those membership bodies, they only equate to just over 50% of the qualified professionals. So you've counted out straight away 80% of professionals that are qualified that could work with you.
Yeah. And many of whom have got reams and reams of experience and the know-how and the professional integrity and resilience to be able to sit with that edge of the seat, you know, you're flipping hanging on with your teeth, can work with that. And the very reason that they've left the NHS is because of the restrictions within the NHS, where there's time limits that just seem to be so arbitrary, well, basically monetary led, that has left so many people having perhaps started a journey and then left adrift partway through. And then they come to private practitioners like myself who have worked in the NHS, but suddenly we're no good. And yet we were good enough for the NHS, but we're no good anymore. It's bizarre.
Yeah. And this is the thing that we've seen with the kind of the framing and the time frames that are placed on those provisions. So the NHS will go, there is a set window in which you must, as the client in need, you must make progress.
Yeah. Get fixed in 6.
Fixed in 6, right? And you know as well as I do, if that was available at the first point of contact, at the first point in that individual's experience where they went, ouch, I need something. Not 9 months later when they go, okay, now I really need something. What do I do? And then 9 months after that, when they've been able to get in front of somebody. The average journey time has been estimated by the College of Nursing to believe to be about, from that first moment of ouch, I might need somebody, getting somebody can be up to 18 months.
Yeah, and I
And then
personally
you've
know.
got fix in 6.
Yeah, and I personally know of people been waiting 2-3 years. Yeah.
From that first moment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that fix in 6, if that was done at that end, rather than the 9-month wait after referral, the chances are fix in 6 could be possible. And we don't have a huge waiting list, and we don't have a huge crisis that can't be done in 6. But neither do we have a situation where it is the client's fault that they haven't been able to get fixed in 6. Because that's what people say they walk away with. They take it that it's there. If the system says you get 6, you should be able to get fixed in 6. And if you can't, it's your fault because we've done what we needed to do. Well, doesn't really make sense. And we see it in systems in children's social care where you have to fail an assessment to get support. You've got to, we see it in eating disorders. You have to be sicker to get the help. When actually the further down that track of needing help someone is, whatever the need is, further down that track they are, the longer they're going to need to get out of it.
Oh yeah, because they will have employed coping strategies, ways of managing something that are absolutely necessary, but may well have just entrenched something else or become issues in and of themselves. So it just makes sense, doesn't it? If you've got a gammy foot, for want of a better phrase, you're going to start limping, and if that's not attended quickly enough, then maybe that limp is going to start affecting hip joints, back alignment. You're going to have all of those problems later on down the line. And it just follows as a logical thing for me that the compensatory needs that we have to put extra effort and energies into to try and manage our mental well-being and our emotional turmoils, it's just going to take longer. It just is.
And it's the psychological stone in your shoe, isn't it?
Yes.
The quicker you get the stone out, the less damage it's going to do.
Absolutely. You might be a bit bruised for a bit, for sure, because we're human and we're standing on it. But yeah, if you start then having pressure sores and very, very deep tissue damage, having that fixed in 6 hours, no.
That's not going to happen, is it?
No.
And this is where I think, when we looked at, or when we were approached by Corporate Livewire last year, and they were looking at what Apple was putting together for the corporate sector and how support that employers were saying they needed in psychological welfare. And we really got to see that the whole of the process has just become stagnant, and the world has moved on. The need for psychological support is more understood now than probably ever has been, and employers are looking at the options that the system presents to them and say, well, this is all paperwork exercise.
Yeah, that I have to say that is a sense that is repeatedly coming through my office door, that what has been offered as well as feeling arbitrary and curtailed really is just, will you go and see this person whether you fit together and work together well enough or not. And we've ticked that box, so we have done our due diligence and duty, and so we are not at risk of being asked to account for why we're not looking after our employees. It feels like a risk aversion culture still, and the end result being that people are actually being harmed in some way by that.
And the perception is, well, the therapy didn't work.
Well, yeah, well, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's the reality. And equally, sometimes people go and see a therapist, and do you know what? The world is eminently better after 2 visits. Absolutely fine. I mean, there are great exponents of single session therapy, and it can happen. But for the vast majority that walk through my door, no, it really is the other way round. They've tried to manage. They've not managed. The help that's been available has been just one size of box, and if you fit in, fine. If you don't, well, that must be your fault. You need to lose weight, or you need to grow an extra leg, or something that just can't be done quickly.
And this is, as one of those supporters of single session systems, because as a coach, if I work with someone early enough, then a single session can be extremely decisive in their choices from that point on. But it's about when you're working with somebody in their journey, not what it is for me, not what it is for the practitioner. And I think in some senses, we've got to a system where financial constraints on our state system says we've got to be seen to do something, but we need to make sure that it's at the right time. Well, the right time is when they can't do it themselves. Well, if someone's got a kidney failing, you don't wait until it's starting to erupt before you deal with it. It's why doctors will treat urinary infections, because they don't want a kidney failure. We deal with it at the right time when somebody actually needs it, and the only way we're ever going to be able to do that is to take away the bottleneck, so we can get the extra 80,000 plus professionals. And by doing that, what does it do to the mindset about therapy to the public?
It's available. It's available widely. Therefore, in the wideness of availability, it becomes an accepted thing. It really does. I mean, that's been a discussion within the addictions forums, hasn't it? That so how come people get addicted to alcohol, but it's so freely available? How there's a different way of managing that perhaps than there might be for managing the illegal or less available things. But to make it available widely, it actually can help to reduce the stigma and the negative viewpoints held about it.
Do you think there is a component, and I'll only put it as a component, that in the wider world, outside of therapy, general public, they see therapy as something that is delivered by charities, and therefore, whatever situation they're in, it's not that bad. I don't want to take away charity from someone that really needs it.
It can be a component. I mean, I've certainly come across that kind of perception. There can also be not only that sense of there'll be others more in need of me than me, but there can also be I can't stoop that low. I can't.
I'm not a charity case.
Yeah. I need to hold some level of dignity and not actually have to resort to charity.
Yeah.
So in that case, just opening up these bottlenecks and getting more and appropriately timed and targeted interventions for people will just enable them to live their lives and to not even struggle for so long that they then face, I didn't get myself fixed in 6, they're not seeing me again for another 3 years, I'm on the bottom of the waiting list. Charity, oh God, I can't face going to charity, because what does that mean about me?
I'm broken. Therapy didn't work in what they say it should work in, so what's the point? And that in itself re-traumatizes the individual at whatever age they're at in that scenario.
Completely, and can be and has been cited, hasn't it, about why people who we now say had PTSD from their First World War experiences, they never spoke of it because to do so was seen as somehow un-British, or you're not coping if you're talking about it, stiff upper lip and deal with it.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether in some respects our culture still perhaps hangs on to that of we're going to try our damnedest to fix it ourselves, and so maybe also in making it more widely available, it perhaps takes away that potential for just reinforcing that somehow if you need something, it's you that's the problem.
Yeah, and I've spoken to probably I'd say over 100 people over the last sort of 4 or 5 months that have gone through different kinds of therapy, different modalities, different things, all on the back of a medical referral, right? So all of them have said that because they know how stretched that support system is, they don't reach out because I can deal with it. I'm not falling apart. I'm not suicidal. I'm not this. I haven't fallen down into illicit coping strategies. I haven't this. I haven't that. I don't need to do anything. It's not that bad yet.
Yeah.
Only to find within a very short period of time, other things around them have started to fall down. And that has then led even quicker into those marker points that they see themselves as measures of, okay, I need help now. So whichever professional comes in at that point, you're dealing with now multiple layers of trauma, multiple social and relationship issues that when they first went, this doesn't feel comfortable, they could have actually got really good, really smart support and avoided all of the rest.
Yeah.
And it's so heartbreaking to hear. And for me, most of the people that I'm talking about are care leavers, are justice leavers, ex-military, or all three, because we know everything works. But when you hear people that have been through that systemic processing to come out the other end and go, I knew that this wasn't right, but I wasn't going to reach out because I know how stretched it is. I know it's going to be a waiting list, so I just get on with it.
Yeah, and it really does highlight the what is for me the questionable ethics of restricting the help that undoubtedly is out here and available, if only that bottleneck didn't exist.
Yeah. And again, you raise the ethical point, and it's scary that we have a situation where the bottleneck is placed by organizations that use the bottleneck on the grounds of they have an ethical framework. Yet the ethical framework, as the employers told us, is a paperwork exercise. Pay your money, produce some paperwork, take the badge. No employer wants to put a professional therapeutic professional in front of their team based solely on the paperwork. They don't. They've been saying it for over a decade. What they want to know is that professional going to adversely impact on their business by working with their team? And no paperwork exercise can reduce that risk, because you've got no clue that the person you've actually given the badge to is the person who's written the essay. Ultimately. And that's what employers say. How do they know? All of these doesn't make a blind bit of difference unless you've actually spoken and put that person under pressure before they go in front of those teams. And because APRA is the only organisation that does that as part of the process, employers go, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that there is something more than just the paperwork behind
Oh
this.
yeah. Yeah. They haven't
Because,
actually been asked the questions.
yeah,
They've actually been asked to account for how come that is. What would I do with that? Yeah. Yeah.
and being comfortable with that uncomfortability, in order, to become an APA member, you have to go through that. Unfortunately, hey guys, you're going to be uncomfortable before you get really happy. But, we, what employers have told us is that gives them a degree of confidence,
Mm-hmm.
because the professional isn't bringing their stuff into the room and adversely impacting on that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Which of course also ties in with those places that have the robust requirements of learner therapists, in that they go through their own therapy, they experience it, they do that thing, so they have that. And certainly in at the end of the degree that I did, and I forget the Latin term for it, but it's one of those where you are in front of a panel effectively, and they're grilling you on your dissertation, on how come this, what did you think to that, why on earth the other. You had to defend yourself. So yeah,
Argue your case, my sir.
oh
Please argue why this is the case.
absolutely, absolutely. You were called to account for how come your philosophy had involved those elements. And yeah, so it was, I mean, it was nerve-wracking, yeah, but wow, what an experience.
Yeah.
But employers, if they knew that was part of that qualification, that surely would give them the comfort to know that it's not just, oh, I've done that essay and sent it in and I've got 70% or whatever, but that I've actually been grilled on my entire ethical and philosophical stance.
Yeah. Let me ask a question directly about APA's process. You've been through the process.
Yeah.
You've got comfortable with that process.
Yeah.
And I know that may sound to other people quite presumptive to make that statement. You have become comfortable with the process, but that's because of the conversations you and I have had over the last few months. Do you think that having part of that process done with peers rather than an executive board or an executive panel is more conducive to the therapeutic process than it is to a management process?
I think so, and I think so because it's the, oh gosh, how should I put it? It's not just almost the acceptability of the proposed joiner, the proposed individual who wants to join, being accepted by the group. It also, it takes away any potential of bias, because I mean, if it was only held again, it would be a bottleneck, wouldn't it? A bottleneck situation, depending on if you were the one to have interviewed me, then that could potentially have been skewed by maybe previous understandings or previous conversations, and we can't help but do that when we meet a people. We arrive with certain preconceptions, so to take that out of the equation and to have it as an open conversation, an inquiry into how is your therapy view, what is your view on this, it gives it to the group, and I would perhaps suggest that it actually strengthens the position of the group, because it takes away the potential for skewing or bias or favoritism or any of those words, and it allows for the membership to know the membership. It's not a paper exercise.
Yeah. And I think when Vonnie and I worked out the framework for those conversations, we were very clear. We were creating something that we would never get involved in unless there was a serious situation that meant that one of us would have to step in to support the team. Now, we have done that, and there are safeguards when we've done that, and the team kind of then take over. You know, if it's me that has had to step in, I think we've had to do this once. I take the role of the team, and the team take my role on the back of that. So we swap roles, and I can't then have any say over any component other than I've carried out the conversation. And that way we're able to make sure that it's not a, as you say, that bottleneck or the bias of Vonnie and I going round and going, hey, let's let our friends in.
Yeah, is that cronyism? Forgive me,
Is it nepotism?
Yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? Yeah.
It's got an ism.
It's an ism of some description. Yeah.
But the idea that the membership itself has a degree of control over the quality of the membership itself,
Yeah.
I think is as close to giving the client that position of saying, what do you want from your journey?
Yeah.
You know, and with every step within APA, we've tried to look at the connection between the therapeutic and client relationship and the membership body and the professional relationship, and make that as smooth and as mirrored as is possible. Do you think moving forward, 2021 around the corner, COVID has crucified the planet in so many different ways and different areas, and you know, that's a whole different conversation accepted.
Yeah.
But the therapeutic community, when we were needed the most, we were pulled apart from within. The vision was imposed where it wasn't needed, in my opinion. But do you think that 2021 will mark the kind of the awakening of the therapeutic professional to question why of the membership bodies, including APA?
I think that is something that perhaps would be good to be held in mind. Not as a massive, vendetta or not against any particular group at all, but I think the ability to question, I would hold it that it is, as a professional, part of our duty to ask that question. Where we see it, we are entitled to ask about it. So it's not, I'm because I've questioned a number of employers over a few weeks, just saying, do you really need to say that? Do you want to say that? Because that's what you're saying. It's not just for me to do that. Every member can have that conversation wherever they see it. Because we are professionals, and we can take pride in knowing that we are professionals, and where we see question about our profession, then we can challenge it, and we can ask the question in return.
And I hope every professional looking at this will hear this part. Anyone can question APA. There is no bias, there is no kind of prejudice after somebody questions APA. And this is something that we've seen over and over again. I don't want to rock the boat. With APA, come and rock the boat. Come on, guys, because you can't be a decent sailor if you're sailing on a flat lake on great days of no wind.
Yes.
We need to be making this robust. We need the public to know that we are open, that we are congruent, that we will work with professionals. And if they want to question us, there is Open Contact Thursday, and members have the monthly round table. You can question without fear, and that's key for APA.
Yeah, I certainly found that, and this is certainly one of the aspects I really highly appreciate, because I've had direct experience where I've asked the questions and have been told to shut up, have had questions removed from
Not by
membership
APA.
notice boards. No,
By APA.
not by APA, by other places, both statutory and voluntary. The question has been asked, and various comments made, but essentially, bottom line is, shut up, Ros. We're not answering that. But I have absolutely no question whatsoever. If I ask a question, I know I'll get an answer.
Yeah, you will. Yes, you will. You mentioned having successfully raised the question with employers, and I'm absolutely delighted that one of those was a trust.
Yes. Oxley's NHS Trust. Yes, they amended their advertising to remove any sense or mention of mandatory membership of a particular voluntary group. Yes, they did. They responded. They were very polite. They were prompt, and they amended their advert. Yeah.
It's quite telling when somebody realizes that the governing body status doesn't apply. Most recruiters go, oops, because they know.
Yeah.
They know they cannot put mandatory on something that is voluntary. It doesn't fit in law. So I want to thank you for kind of keep highlighting and keep pointing out where employers are needing additional information, because that's all it is.
It is, yeah. It isn't a name and shame. It isn't a blame game. It isn't it isn't an aggressive thing. It isn't anything like that. It is a question. Do you really mean that? Because that might not be allowed.
Yeah. Clarify, understand, and move. Mm-hmm. Adapt, overcome, succeed.
All of those.
But congratulations on the successes when you've reached out, because they should be applauded. And to everyone that's watched the episode, I hope when you've enjoyed the conversation. I know I have, but I hope that you've gained from it. And if you have, then by all means, take the CPD questionnaire, get yourself a CPD certificate for this session. Ros, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to 2021, like you, with a hope that the profession can come together in its openness, its congruence, and really challenge that we are here to support. We are available, and it's time to mobilize. It really is. So on that, I will say thank you very much, guys. We will see you on another episode of In Conversation With. It has been a pleasure, Ross. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care now, everybody.
Cheers.